So thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the First Nations peoples on whose traditional lands we occupy, and in particular the Gadigal Nation, or the Eora Nation, which the Gadigal people in which I'm speaking to you from, in which I live. And I really would like to acknowledge both past and those present, and those of you who are with us today, this evening for this special book launch. Now, this evening also doubles as a celebration for Michele Seminara's birthday, and what a wonderful occasion to have your birthday and also launch your poetry collection. So we're both excited to share in these celebrations with Michele and her friends. We have a wonderful guest list of poets this evening, and we also have a wonderful distinguished guest with us in Dr. Mehreen Faurqi, who will be also sharing with us in her words. So words this evening be with us in order. We will have Michele just briefly, and then Teena McCarthy, Dr. Mehreen Faurqi, Saba Vasefi, Ali Whitelock, Tim Heffernan and Les Wicks. And Michele herself will be reading. I think she's going to present a very short presentation. I think she mentioned one, but we'll see how we go for time. So enough about me. My name is Angela Stretch for Poetry Sydney, and we are supporting this online launch event for what would have been venue support at Enid Cook Room is now brought to you screen side. So without further ado, I would like to welcome a brief introduction with Michele Seminara to say hello to everybody and welcome you all here.
Thank you so much, Angela. I really appreciate your introduction, and I very much appreciate your support and the support of Poetry Sydney. You were incredible in trying to help me set up the in-person launch in Surry Hills for this event, and you've also been incredible in helping me to pivot quickly and to get it onto online. I'd also really like to thank Dara, who is behind the scenes, beautiful poet from Sydney who runs a poetry salon in Sydney, and I'm very nervous about the technology, and he stepped in. And so thank you so much, Darren. Very, very kind and generous of you to do that. I'm so honoured tonight to have Senator Mehreen Faurqi launching the book. It's incredible. Thank you so much, Mehreen. And also to have my beautiful friends and fellow poets, Saba Vasefi, Ali Whitelock, Les Wicks, and Tim Heffernan also step in and say a few very kind words. So I'm really, really grateful. Just before we start, it is my birthday today, so behind me I do have some champagne. I have to mirror myself. Hang on, I've got a cake my daughter just made for me today, which is beautiful, and so it is a celebration as much as it can be, but I wanted to also give a gift to the viewers. So we're doing a little gift giveaway, book giveaway. So I was trying to think of something fun, you know, but I'm not terribly fun. So I thought I would just do a little guessing competition. So I'd like to give away 2 copies of the book tonight to anyone on Facebook Live or on Zoom. If you can guess who is my all-time favorite poet, first two people, I'll post them out a book. So please pop your answers into the chat or the Facebook Live message, and I'll post you out a book with much glee. But other than that, thank you so much all for being here. I'd like to get started by welcoming my beautiful, beautiful friend Teena McCarthy, who's going to give us an acknowledgement to country.
I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional owners, custodians of this nation. We acknowledge the ancestors and elders who were and continue to be the storytellers. They help us to know our country and her people of the past and present more clearly. Finally, we are reminded of the journey that began with the Aboriginal people in this land, but that now incorporates the larger family of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and all Australian people.
It's Teena McCarthy, and Teena is an Italian Barkandji woman who is a descendant of the stolen generations. Now, you might have seen her on platforms around Sydney, but she's also a visual artist in addition to her poetry. She documents her family's displacement and Aboriginal Australians' loss of culture and their hidden history. Now, her first poetry collection, Spithood, is forthcoming from Cordite Press in September 2021. Now, I'd like you to introduce Dr. Mehreen Faurqi. She is the Green Senator for New South Wales, and she's a civil and environmental engineer and lifelong activist for social and environmental justice. In 2013, she became the first Muslim woman to sit in an Australian parliament. And in 2018, she became Australia's first Muslim senator. She has been a passionate advocate against racism and misogyny and has just released a no-holds-barred memoir, Too Migrant, Too Muslim, Too Loud, from Allen and Unwin. Can we welcome Dr. Mehreen Faurqi?
Thanks, Angela. Hello, everyone. I acknowledge the traditional owners of all the different lands that we might be zooming in from and pay my respects to elders past and present. We are on stolen land. Sovereignty was never ceded. This is, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. I do hope that you are all keeping safe and staying well in these very difficult COVID times. Michele, I must say it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you and amongst all of you to launch Michele's book of poetry, Suburban Fantasy. A huge congratulations and also happy birthday. Robert Adamson has said in his appraisal of Michele's incredible poetry that this brave poet takes on the existential risk of writing to the edge of things. And I can really relate to that, because for me, that's the threshold of being courageous. When you are at the edge of a precipice, when you know what the right thing to do is, when you know that there could be consequences that could even hurt you. Of course, hesitation is natural, but you also know that you've got to do it. So you just do it. You feel the fear and you do it anyway. And we know that throughout history, women across the world from all walks of life, and so many women of color have felt that fear and been bold and courageous anyway. They have been central to struggles of civil rights, environmental and social justice. Just to give a few examples, in the US, Rosa Parks, who refused to give up a bus seat for a white passenger and became the mother of the civil rights movement. The Black Lives Matter movement was founded by women. The tree-hugging women of the Chipko movement in India in the early 1970s inspired environmentalists all around the world when they stopped thousands of trees from being chopped down by forming a human circle around them, even at the risk of their own lives. Malala Yousafzai defied the Taliban in Pakistan, even after being shot in the head, and kept demanding and pushing for girls' rights to be educated. And here in Australia, Aboriginal women led and continue to lead the struggle for First Nations justice, truth, and treaties. None of these women set out to make history. They just did what was right. No one can really deny that when needed, we've simply rolled up our sleeves and got to work. And it was this risk-taking and courage that led to things like voting rights for all women, the right to work, and the right to become parliamentarians. And after I've mentioned parliamentarians, I can't not say something about what has been going on in my workplace this year. And to be honest, since the revelations and allegations of sexual assault in the Australian Parliament, it has been hard to work there. My skin has crawled with disgust every time that I've walked in there. And I can't even imagine how survivors of sexual assault must be feeling. I mean, we know that parliaments have long been aggressive, adversarial places with shouting matches and mudslinging and toxic sexism and racism. And they are dripping in patriarchy and privilege. So it is high time that we change the system and those within it. The whiteness, the maleness, the staleness, and the sameness of parliaments must make way for color, diversity, and variation. And I am thankful that Parliament is having its reckoning. I've been inspired by the women's marches for justice. And I'm glad that women MPs and staff, past and present, are speaking out about the discrimination, the harassment, the abuse, and the violence that they've endured. They and we deserve justice. But it also makes me pose a question. Would these experiences have come to light if they did not affect the privilege? Stories of women who are, for the most part, white and upper class are in the spotlight. And I think it is really important that we include the stories of women of color and others who are ignored by the media and the political establishment. Because there are still so many voices that we need to hear, that we need to believe, and we need to amplify. There are still so many women who remain in the shadows. Domestic workers, farm workers, restaurant and bar workers, and all the women working in professions that are very much hidden from the mainstream, but who nonetheless face the brunt of sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. Women who are undocumented, migrant and refugee women, trans women, Aboriginal women, students, and sex workers who are failed by the system over and over. In my own experience, the culture of sexism in Australian parliamentary life is compounded by racism and white supremacy. For women of color, the direct racism and the constant challenge to our belonging to this country and its parliaments is matched with indirect marginalization of our perspectives. And all that's before you add the toxic masculinity of parliament that has been highlighted this year. You know, you're expected to develop a thick skin and act like a man. And if you don't, then you're easily written off or sidelined. The rough and tumble of politics has real consequences for those of us who refuse to behave like the white men and show no interest in conforming to their system. So amongst all this chaos, because Michele is talking about self-expression in her poetry quite a lot, I've decided to be myself and to refuse to change to fit the hypermasculine white culture of the place, despite the toll it takes. You know, after all, I got involved in politics to shake things up and to make it easier for others like me to make this same journey on our own terms. So I'll take the heat, but I will not be getting out of the kitchen. And growing up in Pakistan, I know more than most the power of patriarchy in silencing women. But more importantly, I know the immense capacity of women to change lives and to save lives. I saw the matriarchs in my family working together with women from across the board, listening to each other and believing each other. They talked about patriarchy and how to subvert it. They relied on each other, listened and shared stories, which was really profound and powerful. And it was the love and guidance of these women that has made me the unapologetic feminist that I am today. It's their encouragement that allows me to say it like it is today. But they also taught me to be vulnerable and have empathy, to be able to feel and hurt. That's why, despite all the hate thrown my way, I refuse to develop a thick skin. I refuse to lose my humanity and sensitivity. One of Michele's poems, Bend Along, really speaks to me in this particular regard. And I just want to read one short verse from it. So here goes. You taught me how to fold in the middle, ducking deep down into the chill water to explore the unplumbed world below, before leading me back through the rising tide, scouting the safe path to tread. There is no question that more and more of us are speaking out, and I am in awe of women who are saying it like it is now, and the ones before that, upon whose shoulders we stand today, because it does take immense courage to speak your truth in a world where the perpetrators have the power and the influence. And it is these bold voices that have encouraged so many others to come forward with their truth. We know that gender equity and justice are hard fought for, and creating change can often be a very long and overwhelming journey. But this struggle is so worthwhile. So it is really important to take a moment to celebrate the wins and milestones. And, since we're celebrating Michele's book today, we might as well celebrate what our collective feminism and activism has done in New South Wales just in the last few years. We've overturned archaic laws that criminalized abortion and policed women's bodies. We've got rid of pregnancy discrimination, which allowed employers to refuse to hire a woman or fire them without liability if they knew that they were pregnant at the time of applying for the job. We have affirmative consent laws soon. And there is a shift happening towards including sexual consent education in the school curriculum, though I do acknowledge that we have somewhere to go there. So we have come a long way, and we should celebrate that. But we do have some way to go. We're still underpaid and underrepresented. Violence against women is still rife. Women are more disadvantaged by war, poverty, and climate change. The impacts of COVID-19 are exacerbated for women and girls in every sphere of life. Yet when I pointed this out in the Senate last year, I was pilloried by the right-wing media for playing identity politics. So the sobering fact is that we will not see gender parity in our lifetime or even in our children's lifetime. On current tracking, it will take 4 or 5 generations to close the global gender gap. And while this gender gap reveals inequalities between men and women, it doesn't show us how the multiplicity of women are faring. For example, First Nations women, refugee women, Muslim women, women of color, trans women. And we know that they are marginalized and disadvantaged. And this is pretty unpalatable to me. There is no question that the speed of change must be accelerated exponentially. We must defy these statistics. But on the way, let's also make sure that the fight for parity is for and with all women. It does strike me that Parliament's moment of reckoning on sexism has coincided with ever-escalating racism. So if our fight for equity is to be with and for all women, this must be our moment to build both a feminist and anti-racist country and society. This is our opportunity to coalesce the rage we feel against injustices and to unite in ways we've never done before. Because I, for one, am sick and tired of chipping away at the wall of patriarchy. I know that we are ready to bring that wall down once and for all. So Michele, thank you for your beautiful, fiery, and fearless book of poetry, which will help us do our bit in our own way to smash the patriarchy.
Thank you. That's Senator Mehreen Faurqi, and inspiring and much appreciated words. Thank you. We're here to join in a celebration for Michele Seminara's launch of Suburban Fantasy out on University of Western Publishing. Now, for purchasing, there is a discount code, and you can, if you're not sure how to get the code, you can just pop in the chat and we can make sure we point you how to get that discount code for the special price for this evening. Next, we have Saba Vasefi. She is a multi-award winning writer, journalist, filmmaker, poet, and academic. She writes for The Guardian on the narratives of displacement, and last year completed her PhD on exilic feminist cinema studies at Macquarie University. And we're very happy to have her here, welcoming Saba Vasefi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Angela, for your kind introduction. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owner of the land where we gather tonight and acknowledge we are gathering in virtual room in a stolen land. And in the name of the voices have been seldom heard, and in the name of the faces that has been seen seldom. And in the name of love, that is all of us savior. It's a great pleasure to be among you tonight, and thank you so much, Michele, for having me. Tonight is very special night to me, because whenever I'm among my allies, I feel I'm sheltered. And tonight is one of those nights, being among Senator Mehreen Faurqi, Michele, and so many other friends in this room. I would like to acknowledge that I am always, since I arrived in Australia, I am empowered by the support of Senator Mehreen Faurqi. Her courage, her the strategy that she put into place to empower people in the margin of society always is inspiring. Always, it's a practical, it's not only a word, it's a practice, it is a praxis. And the other things I would like to acknowledge, that if you see so many, stories these days that I am writing, I would like to let you know that behind the scene, Michele is representing these refugees in Human Rights Commission, and she's behind the scenes supporting so many of the story you see I am writing these days. Thank you, Michele, for your tireless work, unconditional support towards refugee women. And I would like to talk about her first section of work, because it's really resonates with my life experience. The first section of Michele's book, Blood Nature, explores the theme of trauma, the universal traumas that we humans face, the traumas inherited in our blood by virtue of being born as imperfect beings in an imperfect world. I know from my own experience that poetry is a creative vehicle that can help heal our trauma and find solace in each other's words. And I would like to share one of my life experience with Michele and Mehreen. When I came to Australia, it was very interesting. When I look back to my life, in my journey in Australia, it's kind of shocking me how, I wasn't aware of the limit and the roof of democracy in Australia towards marginalized community. And democracy and freedom has a very, very limited roof for women of color in this country. I am coming from very artistic and political family. When I arrived in Australia, despite even I couldn't talk properly in English, but my desire, enthusiasm for artistic expression and creative expression led me to organize Sydney International Women's Poetry and Arts Festival, while I couldn't talk properly in English, because I was thinking, now I am not living under fundamentalist regime. I have the time, I have the opportunity to run those sort of things that I wasn't allowed to do in Iran. But later on, I got my lesson and I learned that I am a woman of color, which I wasn't aware of it before when I was in Iran. And when I've organized first Sydney International Women's Poetry and Arts Festival, it was the first Michele public poetry performance. It was really interesting. Imagine a person who came to this country, unfamiliar with everything, facilitate a platform. And later on, I had huge struggle with the human rights industry to organize this event, not in the margin of Sydney, but in the center of Sydney. And while majority of white people in the human rights sector discouraged me, and they pushed me further to the background to organize this event in Blacktown or some community center. Mehreen Faurqi was the woman who supported this cause, the voice of transnational feminist poets, and brought so many people in the parliament. She hosted this event in Parliament House, and she helped me to organize for several years this event in the city, in the center of the society. But this journey led me to build my connection with Michele. And you cannot believe that later on she helped me to edit my PhD. I think I cannot learn to how should I use English proposition properly. And Michele is the only person always remind me, how should I use English propositions? And later on, Michele become passionate to support those women who I write about them in the news outlet. And this whole connection, encouraged me to talk and to emphasize on unity rather than cancel culture, rather than exclusion, and how building trust, how facilitate opportunity for further dialogue can be empowering for so many people, and how exclusion and cancel culture can be damaging and hurtful. I think Mehreen talked about so many important things, and other beautiful and lovely speaker will read Michele's poem. And I would like to invite you to something different, because tonight is Michele's birthday as well. I would like to invite you to a Persian song, a song that Michele likes. Whenever I sing this song, she's a fan of this song. I would like to invite you to this song that I'm performing and dedicating to Michele and to whoever stand up for justice, for inclusion, for dialogue, and for peace. منم آن ابر وحشی که در هر بیابان به تلخی سرشکی بیفشاند، به جز این قلب سوزان دل ناامیدم پناهی ندارد، خدا داند. ای آشنا ساز دل بشنو از خموشی من، این سکوت مرا ناشنیده مگیر. ای بی وفا چشم دل بگشا، حال من بنگر، سوز و ساز دلم را ندیده مگیر. منم آن ابر وحشی که در هر بیابان به تلخی سرشکی بیفشاند، به جز این اشک سوزان دل ناامیدم پناهی ندارد، خدا داند. منم آن ابر وحشی که در هر بیابان به تلخی سرشکی بیفشاند، به جز این قلب سوزان دل ناامیدم پناهی ندارد خدا داند. دلم گیرد هر زمان بهانه تو، سرم دارد شور عاشقانه تو، روی دل بود به سوی آستانه تو. شاید تا در میان تیرگی ها راه گشاید پر، روی من به شور و غوغاها سر کشد چو مرغ وحشی سوی خانه تو. Happy birthday, Michele.
That's absolutely beautiful. Saba Vasefi, thank you so much. We may not be in person, but we all felt that resonating through wherever you are, beautifully, warmth, passionate, wonderful. Thank you. Michele Seminara is why we're here for the launch of her book, Suburban Fantasy, on UWAP. Now, we do encourage you to purchase the book today, and there is a discount code, and we absolutely 110% encourage you to make use of that. Again, we might not be in person, but we gather for the launch of the book, and this is great influence within which we are provided by these beautiful poets and people of words to share with us in the celebration of this book, Suburban Fantasy, by Michele Seminara. Let's continue. We have Ali Whitelock next. She is a Scottish poet and writer living in Australia. She has written 2 poetry collections, And My Heart Crumples Like a Coke Can, and her most recent, The Lactic Acid in the Calves of Your Despair. Ali's first book, a memoir, Poking Seaweed with a Stick and Running Away from the Smell, was launched at the Sydney Writers' Festival and published to critical acclaim in Australia and the UK. And she is currently working on her second memoir. Can we welcome Ali Whitelock?
This house, so the opening poem goes, has too many windows anyone can see in. Each poem in Suburban Fantasy is an invitation to step in through one of these windows into a house that feels so familiar it could be your own. Memories of terrible things linger in each of these rooms. Michele's voice speaks so truthfully, so darkly, so urgently, it too could almost be your own. Poets often apologise for their poems being dark, but my response is always, I don't go to poetry immediately looking for the light. I go to poetry to see my own darkness reflected back at me. I go to poetry to see myself in the poet who has dared to put such terrible truths on the page. But if the poet has done their job, we find the light in ourselves. And Michele has certainly done her job as a poet in this collection. The artist Mark Rothko was once asked what's going on in his paintings, and he replied, "You've got sadness in you, I've got sadness in me, and my works of art are places where the two sadnesses can meet." And I apply that same principle here in regards to Suburban Fantasy. I'd like to read 2 poems from the collection. The first is called Ms. Suburbia. What a tame beast she has become, idling in the paddocks of her family's unmade beds and mountainous dishes, circumambulating endlessly the dead heart of this domestic poppy field, pausing with lost purpose to pick up something here and artfully place it there, an abstract justification of an involutionary existence. Look, see how she is self-restrained by sedatives and spurred to life by stimulants, then lured to the end of day by the promise of the darkling hours in which to unfurl her monstrous might and play. What desperate play! Such a noble beast is man, and such a cowed beast is woman, tethered by the whim of reproduction to her most nominal self. These poems feel as though they were written in corners of a house where lights out has always been decided by someone else. My own fears, disappointments, and deadness are ignited in this poem, and I feel less alone having read it. I'd like to read this second poem. This poem is called Plot. All afternoon, the women shared their wounding, loosed from fathers, free of knots, under their belts the secret smut, a hot house lark, the race to wed, time gripping tighter. Along the line, children defined the marked-off landscape of their lives. Marriage struck, then swelled, then slowed, the girl displaced inside. A blinding sense of nondescript, bright parodies of dull success, their aims like arrows falling out of sight as if they'd died, and not one flashed uniquely, and nothing fresh survived. I urge everyone to read these poems to understand the silent scream of every woman you've ever known. Women are screaming all around you. More often than not, you can't hear them. How well we keep it all inside, push it all down, present ourselves in our best blue dress. I read these poems and my own screams are heard. Suburban Fantasy holds up the mirror of life, and it is reflected back at us in all its terrible beauty.
Ali Whitelock, giving us a beautiful reading and referring to the second section of Michele Seminara's book, Suburban Fantasy. We now shift to move you towards the third section. Tim Heffernan. Tim Heffernan is an award-winning poet and Deputy Commission with the New South Wales Mental Health Commission. He has worked for over a decade as a mental health care worker and is passionate about working in the intersection of creativity and mental health. With Elise Blaney, he established Mad Poetry and is the co-editor of Verity La's journal Clozapine. Is it Clozapine? Sorry, my pronunciation. Clozapine. I hope that's okay. Clozapine Clinic Mental Health Writing Project. Can we welcome Tim Heffernan?
Thanks very much, Angela, and thank you. It's so humbling to come in after the power of the previous speakers. It's just been an incredible launch so far. Happy birthday, Michele. And I'm just so proud that you've invited me to speak to the third section of the book, which is called Second Coming. And for those people who, like most of us probably, have battled at times with issues of mental health that are often related to what's happened to us, to the traumas of life, to a world that is hostile, this is a part of the book that really relates to me. And so when Michele introduced me to it as something they're dealing with, dark depression and mental health stuff, I thought it was going to be perfect for me to read, and I wasn't disappointed. This section deals with trauma, grief, loss, religion, depression, madness. But as we've heard before, I think it also brings us through to light, to hope, to resilience, and the wonderful defiance that comes through Michele's voice in her poetry. It's a hard world, but we stand up to it, and that's important. To quote from the second poem titled Conception, when grief ossifies, I rise, I rise. The whole section is about how the individual can rise up above tragedy, trauma, rejection, and an unrelenting world. How sometimes we have to retreat to a secret place and to poetry to make sense of things. Again, in Conception, Michele writes at the beginning, I am the eye at the door with my truth-seeking mind. And that truth-seeking is characteristic of all these poems in this section. I'm going to read a couple of poems too, and I'll start with the title poem from this section called Second Coming. It seems I am the problem child again, father speaking on mother's behalf, that nitrogen cold gaze. I bathe in it, it burns, it always burned, but now my skin is bound in bitter scales. How forlorn to be the black one. I don't show it. Let them beat their breasts and rail. I won't. Instead, I involute, secrete this note, beware the coming of your twice-born child. Like Yeats's poem, Second Coming is revelatory. The harm of the parents' words and the scars that we carry cause us to curve into ourselves and write. The twice-born child is caught in like the widening gyre, and we wonder about that child, what rough beast, it's how it's come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. It's a defiant, proud second coming. In many of these poems, we see the outsider, the outcast, the black sheep, the same child who was burnt by the father's words in Second Coming is also bitten by the father's words in the poem Run Rabbit. But, you know, there's good variety in the poems, and the remix of the poem from remix of William Burroughs' Naked Lunch, A Word from the Wise Guy, really breaks this section up and takes me on a bit of a hilarious, irreverent psychedelic trip. It begins, I'll just do the beginning, speaking personally, and if a man speaks any other way, shove a pellet up his ass. So it's a good change in pace and tone and meaning. But then there's a particular poem that attracted my attention called Redact. It speaks to many of us in this sometimes inexplicable, incomprehensible world of poetry. Responding to the biblical line, who among you throws the surest stone? The poet can only half answer, my parents left the boys to redact me. I think the redaction the act of redaction, of taking away the voice, of blotting out histories, is really significant and an important one to ponder on. So the feelings of mental illness, like depression, so the two poems I think that pair well together, Sensate and Sodium Glow, skillfully portray the asphyxiation of depression. In Sodium Glow, we hear these words: "The landscape of grief unfolds miles from light. Begging a silent God, I seek the sky, a thrown fight." Tactical manoeuvring. Sometimes we have to throw a fight to win in the long term. I'm going to finish with a final poem from the sequence, and it's a very special one called Counter Scars, which is remixed in response to Robbie Cockburn's Scars and appears in the chapbook that Robbie and Michele put together. I love all the remixes in Suburban Fantasy. I think Michele has a creative skill of creating something from something. So here's the poem. The cry of my voice is enough to collapse skin. Becoming survival, you cross a passage, preservation wounds forgotten. The panic of blood against blade along poised palm stills. My breath enters your sealed landscapes within. Thank you for the beautiful poems, Michele.
Thank you very much, Tim Heffernan. We're moving along to our final poet before we bring you back with Michele, and you have an opportunity to join in the celebration for the launch of the book, but also to purchase, perhaps win yourself a copy, or to celebrate her birthday. Perhaps all of those we will be doing very shortly. Les Wicks is going to bring us a little more on the book, the fourth section on Incarnate. Les Wicks is a renowned Australian poet, publisher, and editor. He has a long list of achievements in writing, publishing, and broadcasting, including the publication of 13 books of poetry. His latest being The Leaf from Flying Islands Press. Let's welcome Les Wicks.
Hi, apologies in advance. I've got a bit of a throat infection and I may not be doing justice to Michele's fine words. When I first started my exploration of Michele Seminara's brilliant new book, it came to me in a flash there was something fundamentally lacking in the last poem of my next collection. I was reminded again of that frayed border that lies between the poet as creator and the poet as reader. Now, I've followed Michele's aesthetic journey with avid interest from the earliest of days. She, more than any other Australian poet I know, has picked up those ragged strings of boundary, used them as a skipping rope, weaved them to a sui generis design and tied down a succession of the hardest truths. Into Your Fair Hands is to me the apogee of Seminara's balletic play with others' works. Yes, there's such a great dexterity with language, but all the while she never loses touch with what is to me the fundamental imperative for a great book: veracity. The fourth section is titled Incarnate. After this COVID year of no touching, this section is gloriously tactile and yes, touching. Imagery ranges from sea to storm, but it is always firmly tethered to the body, to a frangible humanity. Wonderful lines pepper this section. She had me from the third line of the first poem, Southerly Buster. I quote, "Morning smoked, on the red roofs. Marvel at, quote, our very sense of selves must fall in cascades of disguise and dumb pathways of pain. And again, they scored their grief with razors. What a great line. Seminara proposes in the final piece, Incarnate, that this poem is chainmail. Coming at the end, one may feel compelled to consider the proposition that all her poems are armour, encapsulating, protecting, but not of the body. Perhaps from some perspectives this is so. In writing of something, we all must take a step back. The imagery brings to life people and moments, but by capturing them, do the images also lift them somewhat apart? There's much subject matter here that is uncontainable, whether it be grief made explicable within the image of folding sheets, or looking at the abuse of children on Manus, where self-harm is a means of keeping score. We even see the body's organs which make us all function as encapsulated, contained within a transparent skin. That's the poem Involuntary. But irrespective of whether you pursue this proposition, each reader will inevitably be drawn back to the physicality, the pain, the joys of being human. One is unable and unwilling to look away from the sheer truths of embodiment captured in this book, whether it be her portraiture of body as a pendulous fruit, a drop of water in a wave, or the tongue as a map. You will read and reread this valuable addition to the Australian canon. Darkness alongside peace, nutrition for the mind and soul. I've been asked to read a couple of poems, and they're lovely little pieces. The first one is Diminuendo. I'm learning to tread circumspectly, my belly soft from children, divining the way. Beside me, the cat, utterly at ease, and the dog's inner ears and underbelly faithfully offered up. I've just said prayers, fed flames wrathful maul, white seed instead of black, unprepared for this familiar devotional urge. The world is in tumult, but in this moment, mind is still. Do you see that cloud in the sky? No, nor do I. Ooh. The second piece is Night Watch. Tonight, you escape these bones, the body emptying of everything. Fixed to this earth like a tongue in flesh, you cry a rain of scattered words. Touching you, I think you are here, eyes whispered inside silence. Run, stranger. I am telling you, soon you'll wake beyond nothing. Thanks.
Les Wicks, thank you very much. Well, we've been very spoiled for some incredible insight readings of Michele Seminara's Suburban Fantasy, which we're all gathered for, unfortunately not in person, but pretty close to being so. And it's so wonderful that you can join us for this special occasion. Very happy now next to introduce Michele to tell us a little bit, perhaps we can get her to say something about the book, but to read a poem. And also we can then celebrate with her the launch of the book and her birthday. Can we welcome Michele Seminara?
Thank you so much, Angela. I'd just like to say first, thank you so much to everybody who is watching. I'm really honoured that anybody should turn up virtually or otherwise. It's very humbling. Thank you. Thank you to Senator Mehreen Faurqi for launching the book. That's such an honour. I can't express how grateful I am. And to my beautiful poet launches as well, Les, Saba, Ali and Tim. Huge thank you as well to yourself, Angela, once again for your efforts, and to Dara, who is behind the scenes there, but he's making sure all the right buttons get pressed because I didn't trust myself, and he's so kindly offered to help out. And also a big thanks to my publishers, University of West Australian Publishers, who've been a dream to work with, and I feel very honoured to be able to publish a book. It's not very easy times for the arts, as we all know, at the moment in Australia, especially poetry, which tends to be sort of at the bum end of the literature world, actually. So to actually get a book published at all is, is a huge honour. So I'm very grateful to UWA Publishing. I know we're getting on in time, so I just wanted to finish with one very short poem, which I'm going to read. I was thinking to try and find a poem that's a little bit more upbeat. And then I looked through the book and realised there were very few upbeat poems in this book. So I settled upon the very last poem in the book, which is called Incarnate, which Les briefly alluded to. And I decided to read this one because although the subject matter is ostensibly, not so happy, it is in a way because it deals with the cyclical nature, the solace that writing and that reading other people's words can bring us, and the way it connects us. So the poem's called Incarnate. It's dedicated to my beautiful friend Ramon Leola, who very sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And I know many of you here on the Zoom, being poets, will know Ramon, and what a beautiful, beautiful person he was. So I really wanted to just bring his energy into this launch as well. Incarnate. I'm reading for Reincarnations by Max Ritvo, the book An Unintentional Bequest by my friend, the poet Ramon Leola. Unlike Max, Ramon was evicted by his body from life suddenly, unexpectedly. He left like you leave your home every morning, intending to return. Stepping out, his soul shed all but what barely exists, leaving behind just those earthly accoutrements which others might find useful. A library illuminated with notes and creased corners, his own poems lodged like touchstones in our minds, the sacred relics of his recyclable organs, all cycling out there in the world of others, a generosity of thought and flesh reverberating through space-time. A papery vein burst in Ramon's brain, and out tumbled his full bounty of jewels, each orb a revelation of pomegranate seed quickening on our tongues. We come as supplicants, scavengers, curators, to feast on his cryptic phrase. And now, within the fragile bubble of my own body-mind, as I divine Max Ritvo via Ramon Leola, I glimpse both poets coil, like silver koi linked head to tail, in the glistening chainmail of my poem. So that poem is dedicated to Ramon, who, when he did pass away quite suddenly, he had a huge library of books. He was such a great supporter of other people in the poetry world, particularly, and he invited his friends and family invited other friends to come and choose some books from his library. And one of the books I chose was For Reincarnations by a young poet who passed away from cancer, an American poet called Max Rittvo. And when I was reading that book, just that cyclical nature of our voices all speaking to each other, and the way we don't really pass, especially if what we've written is left behind us. So that gave me a lot of comfort. And I'd like to just say thank you so much once again to everybody. I don't want to keep you any longer. I just want to announce the winners of our fabulous book prize. So we've got 2 winners. I think the first person who picked my favorite poet, everyone was pretty on point actually, but I think the first person was Rosanna Lilly, who chose Emily Dickinson. It was a real thing between Emily Dickinson, Sylvia Plath, maybe, Sharon Olds, who knows? But so Rosanna Lilly chose Emily Dickinson, beautiful. I'll send you out a book, Rosanna. And Robin Cadwallader chose Sylvia Plath first, and she was my number 2. So thank you so very much. I'll be sending you both a book. I think we're going to ask everyone to unmute now so we can have a rowdy 30 seconds of hooray, which is all we get in lockdown, and then we can all get into our jams.
Hey. Congratulations. Fantastic.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody. I raise a glass. I wish I could share it. I wish I could share my chocolate cake my daughter cooked for me, but thank you very much for being here. It's been fabulous. Thank you.